Hey, everybody. Excited to be here. My name is Kent Keirsey. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Invoke. You want to introduce yourself, Paul?
Yeah, and I'm Paul Trillo. I'm a filmmaker and co-founder partner at Asteria, film studio in LA. It's fairly new.
I think Paul and I both have been kind of witness to the last few years of craziness and kind of the emergence of the technology that is lovingly known as generative AI. We're going to talk a little bit today about what things look like on the cutting edge. We'll probably get into some conversations around ethics and a little bit around intellectual property. I had a piece of paper that had a list of questions that we were going to ask today that we had discussed previously. I seem to have lost that. So we're going to do it live, which is great. We love that.
I have faith.
I've got the big picture of kind of the topics. And I think just in conversation with Paul, we've had a lot of free-flowing back and forth, so I think it's going to be perfectly fine. We've got a couple of visuals that we're not going to present. We're just going to kind of use them as visual aid as we're talking about concepts, and a lot of these are, I think, work from you. And then we've got a couple of things that Invoke has done, but I'll spin this up real quick while we're starting here, and maybe you can kick us off by sharing a little bit about your experience kind of witnessing the evolution of AI in this space and kind of how you've seen that change and where you think it's going.
Sure. Yeah, so I got into it first, really started playing around in like 2020 with GAN models. And then it wasn't until 2022 with the release of DALL-E 2 where I could upload my own material to DALL-E and do in-painting that I was really convinced, okay, this is going to be a paradigm shift for visual effects and therefore filmmaking. So very early on, it was still in the beta and didn't really know it was going to be such a hot button, trendy thing. I just knew that like I could make cool shit faster by doing like compositing and asset generation kind of in one go, but really excited about like doing it to my own work. And kind of kept that as like a sort of guiding light is to be able to use my own material and manipulate my own material. But the tools have rapidly changed. The culture wars online have heated up. And so my views have kind of oriented a little bit over the years, just coming from, as a director, filmmaker, being surrounded by voices in the film world that are concerned about this stuff, using that to guide me towards like, okay, well, there's still people that are like, don't really necessarily see the way. They don't see the benefits of this for indie film. So I think I have to work on what is the way we bridge that divide and create like a more ethical way to use these tools that are not going to go away. And I think if we can figure out the ethics of it, then more bees will come to the honey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I think DALL-E 2 is really a pivotal moment for a lot of people. It was like, it was there, right? And you started to see what was shaping with the technology. I think it's also those people who played around with DALL-E and were there at the early stages. They weren't asking these big questions. It was really just kind of like, oh, wow, you can do this now. It's so cool technology, right? But I do think that there have been, especially as the technology is diffused and we have, large language models that have emerged on the scenes, there's just this broader conversation right now around what is the role of AI as a big blanket term in our society.
Right.
And like, how are we going to adapt to that, and how do we make sure that what we're doing is good and ethical?
Yes.
Right. Maybe you can share a little bit about what we've kind of watched as this was going. I'll turn on the next
jump
one as
to
well.
The next video.
Yeah, this is Cuco.
So these are examples of things we're doing at Asteria, and this is a project I just released this week for this music artist, Cuco, LA-based artist. The project was sponsored by Microsoft originally as a way to like find creative alternative uses for AI. And then my studio Asteria kind of like footed the bill for the rest of it. The thesis was, can we do an animated project that doesn't feel like it's AI generated and doesn't actually like harm or doesn't take you out of the experience using these tools, but it amplifies the immersiveness of it. And in order to do that, we still did animation. We didn't like rely. It's about knowing the boundaries of what these tools do, and also like retaining parts of the process that you love and the parts of the process where you have the most agency. So for instance, this part, we're still using traditional 2D animation. We had 5 animators from around the world working remotely, drawing keyframes, pencil sketch keyframes. But instead of having them redraw the frames when we go into the ink and paint stage, we were like, okay, well, we trained a model ourselves. We worked with an artist named Paul Flores. He was paid. He was paid pretty well to draw 60 illustrations. We used that as the foundation of the a stable diffusion and flux model, one for animation, one for asset generation, one for characters. And then we could take like the pencil sketch keyframes and we could imbue it with Paul Flores' style. So like different 2D artists have different kind of hand styles that they draw in. And it's sort of like became a way to create a cohesive aesthetic versus like a very like jarring AI, like randomness aesthetic. It actually like consolidated, like it narrowed the aesthetics of the models by training our own. And it kind of becomes like an autocorrect for it. But even with it looks easy in that video, it still was like lots of research, lots of trial and error, lots of points where we did not think it was going to work. But because we had these ambitious creative goals, it kind of helps like drive the technology. So we're like, we don't know if this can be done, but like, let's see if it can be done. And I think that you should always start with like the creative driving the technology, because if the technology drives the creative, then you're kind of like racing towards the bottom and you're getting like something watered down and something that maybe you don't feel like you have ownership of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to pull out from that I want to make sure that everyone here is following along, because I think you and I could probably sit and go super deep on AI. Show of hands, who knows what training a custom model is and what that kind of entails? I see a pretty good set of hands.
LoRa model, do people familiar with LoRa's? Okay,
I got a couple LoRa's out there.
The education is getting better year by year.
Yeah, I know. It's great. So we'll do a little brief summary of what that involves and kind of entails. And then I think we'll probably have a conversation about the importance of custom models, because I think that's kind of where you and I both see creativity going.
Yeah.
The way that I like to describe these models for like visual aesthetics is almost like they're a dictionary of terms that the model knows. And kind of understands what that most likely looks like. If I ask for a cat on a fire hydrant, it most likely looks like this, right? When you are training a model as an artist, as a creative, you are injecting your language into the model. You are teaching it what you mean when you ask for a certain style, for a certain aesthetic. It can be characters, can be IP. Really, it's anything that you want to redefine that model's understanding to be. And for creatives, I think, one of the things that you raised as a fear earlier when we were just kind of like sharing thoughts on the current state of things was, what happens if everyone starts using this? Do we start to see kind of the aesthetics homogenize, right? Where we just don't have people pushing and striving for something different, right? Training a custom model is really, I would say, powerful. One of the artists that we worked with early on in training a model is an artist by the name of Peter Moorbacher. He's done a lot of like Magic the Gathering, that kind of stuff. He's great artist, and he has this really cool style. His specific aesthetic tends towards androgyny. His characters don't have, very, very masculine or very, very feminine traits. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. And when we trained a custom model on his artwork without intending to, we actually saw the definition for man and woman in the visual aesthetic shift towards androgyny. It was kind of like responding to what it saw in his work. And I think that there's so much that goes unconsciously into an artist's work, and being able to train that and have that picked up by a tool, which is what I think you and I both see these as, is very, very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, you're teaching the AI versus like the AI teaching you, right? So like a lot of like prompting like forces you to speak a weird language that's like not necessarily natural. And I think by teaching the AI, you're like, no, this is actually what I want, versus like you telling me what I want. But from like a practical standpoint, what it's doing is it's like narrowing the aesthetics of the foundational model. So a foundational model being whatever, it could be a video model like Runway, or it could be Flux or Stable Diffusion. There's nearly infinite options, right? When you have billions and billions of parameters. And so you want to like narrow and guide it down these paths. So a model, you can have infinite paths, right? Tree branches that go every direction. And you're like, no, I just want to crawl up that one tree branch. And so the better you fine tune a model, the more you're kind of going down that one path. And so then suddenly the artist feels represented in the process versus being like, oh, that's kind of my work, but not really. And so what we did with this Cuco video is, so we had 60 drawings and then started training a model, like kind of just a rough model. And then we brought Paul Flores into the studio. He has this very specific stippled ink, almost like R. Crumb style of drawing. It's like hard to prompt for that actually. And so we trained, we got pretty close, and then he came back in and reviewed, over 100 additional synthetic assets. And I actually think to strengthen these models, you also have to see what the outputs do and guide those outputs. So I think synthetic data is also kind of interesting. And he went through and like approved one by one, like he yes-no'd like, oh, that's my style. No, that's not my style. And we fed that back into the model.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more and more these models, I think, will ultimately tailor themselves to what an individual artist wants. And it's going to be this kind of back and forth of both during training, which is I'm creating a tool for myself to use in the model, but also as I'm using that model, being able to go in and say, not quite what I wanted, this is what I want specifically.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that you've highlighted in some of these videos that people may not recognize, but models have evolved very rapidly from something that you just type a prompt into. You are guiding it with sketches, you're guiding it with 3D renders. You have a lot of actual direct manipulation and control over composition.
Yeah, it's the best way to use AI. I think the kind of thread through some of this work is directing, is you put the camera in space where you want the camera to be. You work with talent and you get the motion that you want and you design the aesthetics that you want. And then you kind of let AI do essentially rendering. But you can see like the compositing is pretty rough. It's like pretty poor compositing, but it still has like the essence of like the motion that I was going for. So the same applies for the Cuco stuff where we're still designing the camera angles, the camera movements, the character animation, the dancers, that's choreography my friend Hawk did, very specific. We edited it. We then ran it into After Effects and did additional camera work and transitions. It's something you could never have text prompted. And so it has much more emotional connection to like, it has more artist intent at the end of the day. But I'm doing something that I don't think I would have ever done this project without AI. So I'm also like finding new outlets and exploring ideas I would have probably thought were too ambitious before. I think trying to do this like the traditional way with like Houdini still would have like you'd still have creative compromise with the previous tools. I think there's a world in the future with AI where there's like less creative compromise. And I think any project, live action animation, you're always making creative compromise. You're negotiating with yourself of like, you're backed into a corner a lot of the time with timelines and you're like, do you like option A or option B? And you're like, kind of neither, but we're out of time. So I guess option B, but it'd be nice if there was C. And now you have all these options and ways where you can like feed that time spent in like, you could waste like weeks trying to get like a 3D render right. And it still looks like crap, but then you're kind of like out of time and you have to use it. So it's about like reallocating the time that could be spent bogged down, bottlenecks of technical reasons, and feeding that back into the creative to do something much more ambitious or audacious.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've touched on a little bit in conversation for preparing for this was the nature of human input and intent in the process, and that as we think about where this is going, where is that human intent? Are we removing it completely, or like how do you see that evolving? Where are we going to have human intent in the process?
I think it's going to be the most important aspect of using AI is your intention, because without the intention, the AI is then therefore like making all the decisions for you. So you have to like go in with like a very specific perspective and a specific eye for design, a specific curation process, and you have to know what you're aiming for. Otherwise, you're kind of gonna like keel to the hallucinations of AI and just be like, oh, that's good enough. And then and then you put out some AI slop, and then you're not contributing to culture. And I think there's just gonna be like, we're already seeing a lot of that where people are just like saying it's like kind of good enough. I'll just settle for that. And I think as time goes by, we'll realize how important intention is, and those projects will hopefully kind of rise to the top.
I think you bring up like a really good point, which is I think a lot of people are concerned with generative AI about the amount of content that now exists, right? I think that's one of the biggest concerns from a creator perspective is it's so easy to make something for everyone now. People can make something. But as you've probably also witnessed, that's not often very good, right? It's like the AI slop is a favorite term because of that. Right?
Yeah.
I think the question that maybe I'll pivot this to then, because I think it's you've touched on this, is artistic integrity, right? Like what allows you to use these tools and maintain that artistic integrity? Like what is that? What is it that really kind of allows you to do that?
Yeah, I mean it's sticking to your guns. I mean, you know, I've kind of stuck my neck out, like, you know, somehow I am now can never decouple myself from like being connected to AI. When you Google me, even though I've been making stuff for a long time, I'm always going to be connected to AI for better or worse. And so it's really important for me to like keep some sort of integrity and to keep a sort of conceptual lineage from the work I was doing pre-AI, which is, you know, having form and function work together and understanding why you're using the tools. And if you're going to like pursue a concept, how can the technology or the technique that you're using elevate the meaning of the thing? So like with clouds, for instance, cloud dancers, aesthetically, yeah, it's easy and beautiful, but also conceptually it relates to diffusion models in a way. And so it felt like justified to use AI in something where you're hallucinating, like pareidolia is what it's called, right? When you look into the clouds and you see a horse or a person walking, you're sort of, the human eye is forcing nature to like snap into, and that's essentially how diffusion models work, right? They're looking at a noise pattern and then they're trying to do pattern recognition. And so I thought there's an interesting marriage there of like looking to the clouds and seeing forms that may or may not be there, and also how these AI models like work in the latent space. And so I think it's important to like question, why are you using AI and not just to blindly use AI? And so that's part of the integrity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's creating with intent, right? Yeah. And it's kind of what you described there is you had a vision.
And giving yourself constraints. I think that was something you were bringing up earlier, is knowing like, where does the technology, like, what is the technology good at and what is it not good at? And don't try to like, you know, you want to push the barriers of the technology, but also recognize, oh, but it is really good at this one thing. Let's play in with these constraints, these kind of creative limitations, and see what's the best thing we can do. I hope all this work that I'm doing, honestly, I don't really care at the end of the day how it's made. I just want like the audience to be immersed by it. I make these behind the scenes videos because whatever, people like them. They like to see behind how the trick is done, but the pieces should stand alone. And I try to make work that like, hopefully it doesn't matter in a few years, like what technology was used. And so I think that's also something towards like keeping integrity is making sure that it's not going to feel dated.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking to the merit of the art itself, right? If something is going to be considered art, if it's going to resonate with people, if it's going to tell a story, if it's going to make people feel something, how it got there may not be as important as the end result of doing that. But I think one thing that is maybe interesting, and this might be a controversial question, so I'll frame it that way. Do you think that we could have art without people? Do you think that the technology is going to get there? You've seen technology evolve. You've used the earliest forms. You've seen what is possible today. On that trajectory, do you think it's possible?
Well, it goes back to intention. So we have to ask ourselves, can computers have intention? I don't know yet. I mean, maybe there's a brilliant AGI artist around the corner that has, intention and whatever is questioning its own existence and then putting that into art. I think that could still be considered art, but for the most part, right now, you need the intention. Otherwise, it's just a hall of mirrors. It's sort of a simulacra of like what art is supposed to look like, which is a lot of AI art where if someone just says cat in the jungle and it's like this very beautiful cat in the jungle, but there's no like artistic intention, right? Because the prompt was so basic. It becomes like the value of that like goes down a lot. And so I don't know if the value of just fully generative art with no humans at the helm is there. And
for any meaningful project, I mean, I agree with you. So I think that maybe it goes without saying. I don't think that you can really have it today without people involved. But I think if you look at the meaningful projects at scale, it just requires so much more care and design and attention than can currently be executed on by anything that's automated. That looking at Gen AI as like a potential threat for like individual humans is probably not in the near term going to be the case. I think you're always going to have people making the art.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, maybe if you want to share a little bit more around how you see that technology curve maybe changing over the past 2 years. Like, what are the most important developments that you've seen, and where do you think we're going in the next year?
Sure. We could run some background visuals that I guess kind of maybe support that. Okay. Yeah. This is, I see it being integrated in a hybrid way is how I am hoping this technology is used properly. So whether it's animation and you're still hiring animators, or it's, in this case, production. This is a film I did with the YouTube and music artist Poppy. We still shot a film, captured as much as we could in the days that we had, but our footage was not locked. And that was really powerful, is to have all this material and be like, oh, okay, like I'm not stuck in the edit anymore of like, oh, I don't know, I don't have a solve for this. The future of this is something where like the media becomes really like fluid, and there's a plasticity to it where you can constantly shape your own material, and nothing is, for better or worse, nothing's like ever done, right? You can constantly revisit and improve and make something better. But yeah, I really hope, like, at least, I can't speak for all the creative industry, but specifically for the film industry, I think it is something where, because we're not limited like the same ways we used to be limited, we can tell different stories. Indie film can be a lot more ambitious. Indie film can maybe travel to different time periods. You don't have to be as hesitant to pitch an idea to get approval for money, because these tools unlock so many creative possibilities and people become a little more unchained. But you still need to give yourself conceptual constraints and all that stuff. But in order to do that, I guess kind of bringing it maybe a little full circle to like the ethical thing is like the future also, we still need to create some regulations and some ethical standards in order for the broader filmmaking industry to be willing to even take a look at what this stuff does. There's a lot of people that they hear the word AI. The Brutalist got a lot of flack for very minorly like augmenting some voiceover, and because there's this perception that AI is not ethical. And I think the only way forward in the future is if we find a way to do it, maybe at least our model, like at Asteria and Moon Valley, is to do something with that's completely clean. It has no stolen data in it, and therefore you start to like again attract more bees with the honey, and you might get people that were skeptical of AI to start to like open themselves up to it, because things are done with more ethical practices. Let's say you shoot your film, you want to do a reshoot of it digitally with AI. You want to create additional material. There's things built into the SAG contracts. There's below the line workers that can somehow find a way to get compensated if additional material is generated for a film. And so try to set some of these standards so it's not just a Wild West. I think that is like important. And having a model with no stolen data in it sort of prioritizes the artist and says like, this is a safe place for artists, and we want you to like bring your own material on top of these foundational models that are completely clean and copyrightable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a good point. I think the question that we still, I don't think, have an answer to, because we have clean models. One of the ones that Invoke partners with is a company called Bria, and Bria is trained on like Getty and Shutterstock and all of those other companies. They're licensing that data and they're giving an attribution fee. But when you talk to an artist and you give them that nugget, sometimes they say, okay, but I still don't like it. I still don't want to use it, right? And I think there's still an unanswered question right now of what is unethical around the use of AI. What exactly do we do? And I don't know that we're going to like arrive at an answer on this, because I think that's probably like going to come from a broader societal context. But I think, the way that we've looked at it at Invoke is really thinking about what is going to be the best for individual creators, because that's really like who we emerged from, individual creativity, and we want to kind of like continue to serve that. How are we going to make them successful? Yeah. And I think part of that comes back to control.
Yes.
Right? Creative control is what gives you the ability to have agency in the creative process. Giving better tools to do that is good.
Huge.
I think one thing that we've not touched on in this conversation is how important open source AI has
accessibility, like you're saying. Yeah.
So for context, a lot of what we've talked about as kind of the emerging like AI toolkit, Stable Diffusion was probably the first real meaningful open source model for
right, because
creatives.
the GAN stuff was open source, right?
Well, there was open source stuff, but I think there was like more like hallucinatory type gen art rather than like, I'm going to make this
controllable
picture.
Like Stable Diffusion was the first controllable open source model,
right? And people were tuning it, people were training it, people are using this as a tool. And I think the importance of that open source access means anyone in this room can go use that to create something new. They can train a model that can be theirs. And I think there's something like inherently right about giving people access to the technology as it emerges. That's one of the reasons why Invoke is open source. So our tool is completely free to download. People use it to create. And I think that looking at ethics going forward, I think accessibility is one of those key things. Yeah,
absolutely. I think some of that. So open source is amazing. I love it. That's like everything I do is built a lot. Like I'd say 90% of it's built off of open source material. But there's still a question of compute and accessibility and compute. For people in countries where they can't get a 4090, let alone have access to an H100. And so I think we need to bring down compute costs in order for accessibility to like really have a meaningful effect. And so that, because there's this promise that whatever, filmmakers from any country. So it's a tricky thing with open source because it needs to be done locally to some degree. I mean, unless, whatever. I mean, maybe you guys have hosting services.
That's what our business is.
Yeah. So I think figuring out those costs and creating more energy efficient and being more green about it also opens up accessibility.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of really good work in the space. Hugging Face is a really well-known open source AI company, and they spend a ton of research and time making models more accessible.
More efficient.
They do things like quantizing. They make the model smaller so you can run it on like a Game Boy Advanced or whatever you have lying around. They've done a really good job of really bringing that down and pushing it out so that people can use those tools and really learn from them, figure out how to use them. A lot of people will start, they don't have the best computer, they'll start, but that enables them to then do the next thing, right? It's that kind of bootstrapping mentality. So I think there's a lot of really cool stuff there. Okay, so one thing that we'll touch on is copyright and intellectual property. I don't know how to segue this nicely, so I'm just gonna like blow through these slides and see if there's like anything that it sparks in you.
Sure.
This is a single piece of American cheese. It's the first image generated with AI tools to receive a U.S. copyright. That was as of January 30th of this year. It took me about 2 years to get the U.S. Copyright Office to recognize anything I did with AI as human-driven or originating from me. I think the current stance of the U.S. Copyright Office is anything that comes out of these AI-generated systems, if you simply type in a prompt, even if you're using something like a sketch or a drawing, or if you've got a fine-tuned model, today the stance is that none of that is copyrightable. And so the question that I kind of set out to ask was like, how do we demonstrate that there is creativity in the process? And I think you, in your work, you're effectively doing all of the things that we had to do to end up getting a copyright. But what we did was this kind of multi-stage process of in-painting, right? And my goal was really to find the floor of like, this is the
right, like, because I have like more of the maximalist, like doing a lot of it, but like, what is the minimal amount of human intervention?
Right. Exactly. Because I think for what we're trying to do is we're trying to prove a point to the U.S. Copyright Office, which is like, there's human creativity and there's a threshold where you're going to have to admit that a human made this possible. Like a generative system did not do this. And you have to recognize that. Otherwise, we live in just kind of complete absurdity. And so, this was like a multi-stage process using Invoke. We went through and kind of like edited, modified. I drew in certain pieces. I edited the backgrounds. And I did a number of different things. I think it's going to play like a time-lapse thing for a little bit here. We'll just let that go. We don't have to talk about that too much anymore. But I think the nature of the creative process is this one of, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, it's almost like this participatory relationship with the work where you're seeing where it is and you're seeing what you need to do to get it closer to what you want, right?
Yeah. It's like, how do I get what's in my head onto the screen in front of other eyeballs as fast as I can? That's all time is precious in this life. And so you want to just like, you want to get your ideas out sooner. But you want to make sure that they are your ideas. And again, you're not being too influenced by the AI's suggestions.
When you think about the future of these tools, I think you and I both have like alluded to this a little bit, but I'm curious if you'll just like elaborate for the audience here.
Yeah.
What is your hope for the tool of the future? Like how would you see that evolving? Because I think we both see this kind of like this interface that exists today is still friction, right?
Yes.
Of getting what you want out. And it's kind of like, what is that dream thing?
Yeah, it's almost like a real-time asset generation world that you are navigating spatially. I think spatial video, real-time spatial generative video is the future. And that means like we could simulate this auditorium. There's a million, infinite possibilities of where a camera could go in this space. So if I ask the AI to generate whatever, like a conference hall, it's gonna, give me a bunch of things that might not be the exact angle I want. And as a director, I think every single like degree of like where the camera is placed in space is a choice. And so you need to be able to navigate a camera in space. And so I think things are like, I hope they're going towards some sort of spatial 3D navigation, but without being bogged down or feeling like an arduous process that 3D has traditionally had. So roughing out like where you want to move the camera in space, roughing out where the subjects are, and then rendering it in AI to look like the aesthetics you've designed.
Yeah, that you've used this term a couple of times in conversation, which is like rendering, and I think that's it's an interesting word because it brings back like the tradition of computer generated imagery, right?
Right.
Which is funny because it's there's the word generated in.
I mean, I call this stuff CGI too. It is computer generated imagery. It's like, it's funny to make these distinctions, but at the end of the day, it's a computer generating something. It's been like that for over 30 years now.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at how your process and really the very robust pipelines that professionals are using to leverage the technology today, it really is, in some sense, just a much better rendering engine.
Yeah.
It's rather than having to fight the tools to like get the right color and the aesthetic, you're using this kind of neural net to pull that out using words. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, but then once you have designed your world, it's like world building is how I see these things working in the future, and a world that you can return to and keep iterating on. So we also like need to find better ways to get consistency between characters and all this stuff. And so it's about having like sort of a library of assets and presets and things like that you can return to, so you know exactly what you're going to get. Otherwise, like, again, it's, if you can't control it, then it feels like you have less ownership in the process.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this goes back to one of the earlier conversations we had on stage, which was around the importance of custom models, right? Because that customization process is really tuning the tools that you're going to use repeatedly throughout a project, right? You're going to keep coming back to use those same tools again and again, because that's what drives that consistency. It's what gives you that repeatability.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I don't know if it's resonating, but to me, that the customization, whether it's the model that we're helping, that's this clean model, or other models, it's all about what you add on top of it. And so that is like the key thing, is like, don't just like use the data that's out there, bring your own data to these models, and you will have a connection to the material that is like fundamentally different than just text to image. And so, I mean, something I was like talking about earlier before was, is that like emotional connection, right? So like, I made this the first Sora music video for the artist Washed Out, and put a lot of time into it, whatever, but I was not working with a custom model. I was trying to like customize it with very detailed text prompts, right? Like sort of like text embedding by like repeating the same key phrases to describe characters, camera aesthetics, and motion. But I generated over 700 clips, 330 minutes of material. And you got to kill a lot of babies, and it was like very easy to just be like, nope, don't like that. That's not working. That's not this project. And you lose this emotional connection to the material, for better or worse. And, I'm still proud of that video, but it's not the same feeling I have of like when I'm on set and I'm shooting something, or even the Cuco thing, where it felt like, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into crafting this to look exactly how we want. And so I think it's important to have, if you want the work to resonate emotionally, or what that people call like, AI, like art has like no soul, it might be because there is this lack of like emotional connection between the creator and the creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons I like a lot of your most recent work, is because you can see that craft, and I think hopefully folks have seen some of this stuff with the videos, but you can see the care that went in to make something that would resonate, right? And I think a lot of artists, when you talk about using these tools today, what they'll describe it as is almost like a slot machine, right? And I think that's kind of what you described with this process of working with Sora, which is you generate a bunch of...
I say it's like wishing well.
Yeah, exactly. I hope I get something useful. And it's not really... that's not really the category of a tool. When you're wishing that something will work, like hope is not a strategy. You can't build a business around like, we hope this will generate something useful. And so as we see these tools kind of emerge that allow for controllability and customizability. I think that's where we're starting to see a lot of these really interesting works come out, because it's, we can use that as a tool and it doesn't, result in something that's devoid of anything meaningful, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I don't know how to expand on that because I just agree 100%.
Nod, okay. Well, maybe what we'll do now is we'll open up the floor to questions, and there is I don't think any off limits questions. Feel free to ask us anything.
Yeah.
Hi guys, thanks.
Hi.
Really interesting conversation. So I teach teams how to use generative tools in advertising production. And there's like a fascinating shift going on. So like with video editors, they're normally curators, not like creators of content. And you're asking them to now translate all of that thinking into text, as you said, into prompts, which is like inherently not the way somebody might be thinking like that. So my question is, if it's maybe about teaching, I'm finding about teaching people how to think rather than about necessarily teaching them tools or terminology. That's kind of where my head's going with it. I just wondered what skills do you think are the most important to be teaching creative teams and teaching people in this space?
I think you go first.
I mean, it's about communication. So if it's just about communicating your ideas as much as well as you can, and I think enabling people to like use their words properly. I think like as an editor now you're like way more powerful than you used to be, and editing is communication. And I think just working with editors in the past, it feels like sometimes they're like, oh well, the footage isn't there to tell this story or to do this idea. And so I think it's about like empowering maybe people that are at different, maybe like not the top part of the creative process to be able to like use their words and communicate and have agency and suggest. And now the editor who maybe wasn't a director or DP before can now make more powerful suggestions and communicate an idea better.
But I think what you're maybe getting at too, though, is there's maybe some foundational knowledge of what it takes to be a creator, to know composition, to know how to make pleasing color palette and do color grading and stuff like that. There's more of that is now available to maybe people who weren't responsible for thinking through that before, and really kind of figuring out what is going to make this resonate, what's going to make this good. I think the beauty of that is a lot of that knowledge is old, right? It's not it's not something that's like only relevant.
The principles are still there.
Yeah, the principles are like foundational to creating anything that is pleasing. I mean, there's centuries, if not millennia, of people who've like practiced and tried to figure that out. And so I think the most wonderful thing about a lot of this is that it has inspired people who would not have otherwise thought themselves possible of learning that to go back and start, right? To start that learning journey of, now I'm going to go figure out how to create something beautiful, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of that's just looking back at foundational creator principles,
Great, thanks.
My name's Tom. I'm just a bit of a build on that, really. I've worked with these tools for a while, and they just feel like averaging machines,
right? Which
is kind of exciting. And I think your work kind of we're in the creative business, so we need to be in the top 1%. So
yes,
a lot of the work is to sort of move from that 50% up. And my experience is that there's other skills that are coming. You have experience before AI, and
right.
What are the new skills for me? Like curation suddenly becomes the ability. Those fine-tune the lauras are about curation, which is a different skill set to previous filmmaking. I was just wondering if there were if that's true, and is there other skill sets that are coming through that are kind of relevant that weren't relevant before?
Previous skill sets,
just general skill sets.
So like AI specific skill sets.
Your comfy UI stuff, and the kind of engineering is kind of elevating stuff, and
yeah, I mean, there's comfy UI is a endless well it's scary to go down sometimes because it is very deep, but very powerful, and it is not a toy, Comfy UI. And I think there's the distinction between a lot of the other AI tools out there is it is more akin to like Nuke or some VFX tools. And there are a lot of skills that I don't even have for like the generative ink and paint thing. I had to work with a team of people to like crack that, and even they were skeptical that it was going to work. And so, yeah, I mean, there is a whole new suite of things coming. I think Comfy UI is probably more of a safe bet than some of the other stuff that's out there. And Invoke's like maybe like kind of a gateway into Comfy to some degree. But going back to like the curation, you can't really teach curation. You have to have a perspective on the world. You have to have vision and voice, and that only comes from doing things the hard way. And I was kind of alluding to this earlier, is like that 10,000 hours that you took to get really good at your craft is still really important, and if not more than ever. I feel like there's a world where the good enough is gonna override like a lot of the content. Like we're going to be like inundated with stuff we don't like looking at because people have just settled for good enough. And I'm scared of a future where of homogenous aesthetics, of things that are not being pushed because there's not a really great lens behind it. And so I think voice is highly important right now. I think learning the traditional skills is still important. I worry about kids that are not going to pick up a pencil or pick up a camera, or film with their friends and turn their friends into actors, if this goes the wrong way. So I think those principal skills are really important in order for culture to have amazing things to look at. Otherwise, we're stuck in this recycle of what's in the training data.
Yeah, I mean, I think agree with you on that piece. I think I'm optimistic. I think I'm a pragmatic optimist. I look at this and I think that a lot of what you've done has shown that those skills matter and that they're very powerful ways of controlling. So I think a sketch is one of the best ways of controlling AI today, because it allows you as a human to not just say, but show what you want. And I think that will continue to be a skill. I think 3D rendering and film will all be relevant parts of that. I think when I look at the emerging tools that exist in the space, Comfy offers a lot of the kind of like raw engineering horsepower of I want to go deep and kind of customize this workflow. What Invoke has always tried to do in the space is really take what's coming out on a broader pattern basis of like what tools do we need to offer creatives, and really built that into the application experience kind of foundationally, right? And so because we started in image, we still primarily operate on image, and we have like a canvas where you can really go in and do most of the things that people are doing in very like ornate, bespoke, comfy workflows. It's like you've built a mini application almost to do it for yourself. We've built that into the application. What we haven't done yet is done that for video. And the reason why is because when you look at what the video technology has been in the early stages of Stable Diffusion, it was largely frame by frame manipulation and doing kind of like this process of trying to stitch that together over time, which to comment on clouds, I think you leaned into that, right? You leaned into that hallucinatory element and made that a feature instead of a bug, which I think is brilliant. But that's not the way, right? That's not what's going to happen going forward. We're starting to see the pattern of video model emerge in 2025 of kind of having a video that's a driver video, right? And so I'm going to put this into the model and it's going to understand and allow me to restyle and retexture it with a lot of control. That's what we're really waiting on at Invoke to build the video version of what we've done on the canvas. And I think once we have those tools, there's still a place for like the workflow piece, because there's going to be specific people who want the nth degree of control on that exact workflow. Yeah. But for 90% of the use case, you really want a set of tools that don't feel like you want to like, beat your head against the computer screen to use.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll lead with the toy tool continuum.
Yeah, exactly. That's
What's
right.
that?
I will leave with the toy tool continuum.
Yes,
Toy
exactly.
tool continuum.
Yes.
Yeah, appreciate your question.
Leaning away from the music or from the film and graphic design industry a little bit into the music industry, I'm a student and I've been studying the Suno and Udio lawsuit a little bit with the three major music labels. And I was just wondering what you two think about the lawsuit and where do you think the music industry will go with this lawsuit and any possible ramifications from both outcomes potentially.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
that's a good question.
That's a big one.
You want to?
I can go first if
Yeah.
you want. I think the music industry and copyright, those are like a complicated Venn diagram, right? The music industry has had a very different relationship with copyright than the visual industries. I think there have been some lawsuits in the past where you listen to the first 5 seconds of a song.
Melody.
It's just kind of like
cause a lawsuit.
a melody, but even just like a vibe, like
Right.
there's like a beat and you're like, that's my beat. And I think you start to see the music industry get really sensitive about copyright, especially in generative AI, because it really pushes a lot of questions around what's a copy and what's not a copy, what's transformative, what's derivative. I think the Udio Suno lawsuit is going to be foundational when it resolves itself one way or the other, because I think it will have massive ramifications in either direction. I think it will effectively centralize and consolidate control of the music industry into the existing labels if the lawsuit is successful. Basically, they have all of the data and they can make their models, and they're the only ones that can do that. They're kind of privileged in that way. I think if it ends up being fair use, then it really just kind of blows up an industry, right? The industry is going to change dramatically. So I don't know that I can say anything other than it's going to be big. Whatever happens, right? It will be big. I think the question we should probably be asking ourselves is, what is the version of reality that we want that to look like, and how do we make that happen? And what are the things that we believe will guide things in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely very curious. I mean, even with this Cuco video, where it kind of sort of had to tailor the music that we used in the Cuco video because Universal has these lawsuits going, UMG. And so we couldn't actually use the real song. We had to strip the vocals out and re-edit the stems, which was a little silly because of how much manual work we were doing on the visual side. They're very sensitive. Anyways, I was feeling the over. I think there's almost an overreaction in some degree with because those are industries that are in danger. Film industry is also in danger too, and it could set a precedent where the film industry maybe follows suit depending on what happens with that lawsuit, and we could start to do investigations into how these other models were created on the visual side.
Interesting. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. All right. So I was given the 5-minute warning.
We have
what I want to do.
1 minute per.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to take anything away from the people who've been waiting in line. What I'm maybe going to propose is we have everybody ask their question and we try to figure out how to answer all of them in one go.
Oh wow!
All right, let's do.
He's got a whole book of questions.
I know. You cannot read all those questions. You can't read all those questions.
Thank you. My name's Mylan Cannon. I'm a commercial filmmaker based out of DC. What's the contract look like for the work that you showed? The contract for the artist who produces the assets for the AI model that you talked about in that first piece of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Relationship
Good
with the contract
Yes.
and the artist.
Hi, I work in production and programming, and I'm one of those people who struggles with the ethics of generative AI. And I love how much you focus on clean data for training the models, but I'm wondering, just full stop, what do you say to skeptics?
Okay.
Answering skeptics.
Okay. So we have contract skeptics.
Hi. Question going back to when you're looking at training these models yourself, is there any concern that you're kind of getting your way of creating art out there for the world, and especially with like the free models. I think of it as like making your own brush, right? And others don't have access to that brush unless you're uploading them.
Mm-hmm.
Is your brushes uploaded?
Training, and how do you make sure that your voice is yours?
Yeah. Okay.
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
Hi, I represent a collective on a mission to take internet's biggest filmmakers from their bedrooms into big screens, and we're partnered up with Patreon to produce 9 shorts and 1 feature. And a lot of our creators are really curious about the Gen AI tools and this space. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about your take and partnerships with the creator space.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
We're going to blend all of this together now.
Yeah. Mad Libs of a question, Q&A.
I thought it was going to be easy.
Okay. So it was contracts,
skeptics, training, and
training and like ownership, safety, privacy.
Okay. Maybe I'll put a thought together for the middle 2, and then we can tackle the last 2, because I think you probably have perspectives on the creator space and you know the contract. I'm not going to answer that question for you. The reason why I am such a big proponent of open source AI is because I think artists and creators should own their model. And there are a lot of services. Everyone knows that training is the frontier when it comes to creator tools. Like it's an inevitability. Everyone knows that. There are some platforms that would have you train your model on their system and be locked in to their system. And I think that's the big risk for centralized control of AI models and not having kind of like open models. So that's one of the big reasons I have been a proponent of open models since I got into this space. I helped start the Linux Foundation's Open Model Initiative, which is trying to continue to train and push open model development. And I think that, foundationally, going back to the question on like, what is skeptics? How do you address the concerns of skeptics? Really, a lot of the time when I'm speaking to a skeptic, I'm trying to understand why. Why are they skeptical? Is it because they don't think that they have control? Because we can show them that you now do. Is it because of the training data and the sources and how it's going to affect culture? I think there are a myriad answers to that question of like, what's the right way to train a model? I think the inevitability is that it will be figured out. Like we will land on a consensus of this is how it's going to be. We're not going back to pre-Gen AI, right? Like Gen AI is not going back into a bottle. Like we know it's possible. The matter of the question is really, how do we do that? And how do we do that right? And I think that's kind of a journey that we are all still continually on, but one that I believe is foundationally answered by open and accessibility.
Yeah. So it kind of relates to the other question. So I guess contract and then creators, I'll try to tackle into one thing, but it relates.
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. So contract, Paul Flores contracted to do 60 illustrations. We made the model based on his work, and then we got from those 60 illustrations infinite, unlimited assets. So to some people that might feel maybe unethical that we're continually exploiting Paul Flores's work, but it was in the contract to do that. If we were to do another project in the Cuco universe, he would be brought back in. He would be brought back in to do more illustrations. We would figure out a compensation model for like how much the model is used. If it becomes episodic, he gets some sort of stipend for that. And so that goes back into if you are making a custom model that the creator owns that's their IP. Their model is not just a product; it is something that is an extension of them.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. As creators look towards using these tools, I think having the ownership of their data, of their material, keeping it safe and private is really important. And I think there is risks of uploading your material to other platforms because that could become training data at some point. And so if you have these local systems, open source systems that you're using, you're less exposing yourself to having your material exploited. And so as powerful and exciting as this stuff is, it is important to like retain your kind of like your artist's voice, unless you are full communist and you don't care and information wants to be free. But I think I think as creators should look towards what they can do on a local system, because they're going to find more control and more privacy. It's a little bit more to learn, but I think that there's like more interesting results that they could find.
You can also use a trusted partner like Invoke.com.
Yeah, there you go.
Just throwing that out there. I think that's it. I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you coming.
Appreciate it.